Brought to you by Mint Mobile. Stay tuned for a special offer at the end of the show. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joar, and today is Friday, November 1st, 2024. And I've got the lovely David Lumb here, all the way from Los Angeles. Hi, David. How are you?
Hey, Miriam. How's it going?
I'm good. I'm in Vancouver today, so I'm just a little ways up the coast from you. And there's a lot that happened this week. Like, we were at Qualcomm Summit last week together. And since then, all the phones have dropped, it seems like. So it's like, wow, quite a bit of stuff going on. So basically, I want to talk about some of these phones. We know some of them were announced during the summit, but we now have specs and details. I also want to talk about the Apple products that dropped this week. You went to the Apple event. So I'm super excited as a Mac user. There's a lot going on. So let's get into it, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's start with Apple, actually. You went to the event and they announced 3 products. What did we get?
So this was a Los Angeles kind of pseudo-influencer event, West Hollywood, kind of open you into a big space. And there we've got them. The new Mac Mini, the new iMac, and the new MacBook Pro, all of them with M4 chips. So the best silicon Apple has spread kind of across. Not all of them are getting the big, powerful M4 Pro and M4 Max chips, but all of them get boost in performance and prep them for Apple Intelligence, as you'd expect.
That's awesome. As a Mac user, what excites me the most here, well, everything, but I'm not a MacBook Pro user, so I appreciate a good MacBook Pro, but I feel like for my purposes, it's overkill, so I've always used an Air. But obviously, the Air did get an update. It got updated to 16 gig base RAM, which is, oh my God, finally so necessary. Yes, Apple, you're doing it right. I kid a bit, but at the same time, I don't, because like I think that, I've always lived with the M chips. I've always been fine with 8 gigs for my personal use, but I feel like I want the headroom, because those Macs last forever. Like I easily keep my Macs 5 to 7 years. So like, I don't see a reason to upgrade very often. And so you want as much RAM as you can afford. And that was outrageous how much extra they wanted for 16 gigs, $200 more. When you're buying a laptop that's like, $1,200, you don't want to spend $200 more for 16 gigs. Or maybe you do. I certainly didn't. I'd rather spend that same amount for more storage, because the base storage still sucks too, 256 gigs on these. So that's exciting. But I think that for me, the Mac Mini is probably the one that I'm like, oh yeah, because I've owned a few and I haven't had any M1s yet. And I went from actually a Mac Mini, like, I don't know, octa-core? No, maybe not quad-core. It was like one of those servers. It was a Core i7 server, so it didn't have a very good GPU, but it had a lot of multi-core performance. And I went from that with an external Dell display to an iMac 27-inch i5, like, I don't know, probably 7 years ago. Like probably a year or two before COVID. And I kept that the iMac for a while. And then I feel so shafted. I just upgraded in July to an iMac M3 with 8 gigs of RAM and 512 gigs of storage, because that was the price tier that was best for me. And now I could get the same thing for the same price for 16 gigs and USB-C on the peripherals, which, can we talk about
lighting, baby?
Yeah, but can we talk about what they didn't change?
With the Mini or the iMac?
No, with the mouse.
Oh.
You know what I'm talking about.
3 steps forward, 2 steps back. Hey, we got USB-C on the mouse and the keyboard, but you're going to have to deal with recharging it upside down like a turtle again. Still, I should say, after a decade. I think it's a little ridiculous, but hey, whatever, we'll take it. I honestly, I hate that they wouldn't redesign it, even like make it slightly, I don't know, you've seen USB-C ports on phones where they're not recessed, they have a bit of a curve to them and it still works. Like, why can't they work something out like that? Yeah, like a design notch.
Yeah. But then again, to be honest, as a long-time Mac user that has had the turtle mouse, as I like to call it, it's really not that big of a deal. Like, you see your battery getting low, maybe the night before, your next day. You just plug it in at night and that's fine. And I always keep a second mouse floating around, like, in case I have an urgent must charge the mouse now. And that's the part that sucks, because you should be able to just plug a cable in and just continue using it like any reasonable mouse would. But the keyboard, honestly, you can use it while it charges, so that's never been an issue. Just Lightning has always been stupid. And look, I have nothing against Lightning per se. At the time, it made sense. It solved the problem. It was the first of its kind, like the first connector that didn't have any direction for insertion. It was reconfigurable at connection. So all the pins can be assigned differently in software, which is kind of something that even USB-C doesn't do, right? Like it has so many, and also it's very robust, much more robust than USB-C, which a lot of people don't realize. And so per se, it's good, but because it didn't become a standard. And to me, standards just make more sense. I went early on USB-C because of the phones I was reviewing. OnePlus 2 was the first one. And then, of course, I got the first Mac with USB-C, the tiny little 12-inch ultra portable MacBook Retina.
Oh, yeah.
That thing was great, honestly. I carried that as my work laptop on trips for 5 years or something. People thought I was nuts because I'm like, well, I learned to manage the lack of power. Like I just didn't open as many tabs. I did video editing on this thing just fine. It wasn't as sluggish as people think. It's just thermals would throttle it if you did anything serious.
Oh, yeah.
And then of course, if you had more than 5 or 10 tabs, you were screwed. Like, but everything else, and the one port never was an issue. I just bought a hub and called it a day, and that was that. But honestly, the Air is definitely a bit bigger and heavier than I'd like, but definitely solves, the M chip solves a lot of problems.
Yeah,
but,
it's certainly powerful enough and got the efficiency that I think people will be happy.
But I'm curious to know, like, are you primarily a Mac user or not? And like coming into this Apple world, if you're not, covering it, I'd be kind of curious what your thoughts were. Like, you probably giggled at the mouse and at the 16 gigs of RAM. But any other thoughts you had?
Yeah, I'm pretty split. I've got a work machine that is, I think, an M1 MacBook Pro from a few years ago, a little hefty, and I definitely hate the wide touchpad. But my main machine is a PC, used for a little light gaming. So I do straddle the worlds. I still think the battery efficiency is what sells it the most. I mean, if you're going to get up to 24 hours with the new MacBook Pros, like that's huge. And, of course that varies depending on what you're doing. But maybe it's a little light on spec for memory and storage, but like if you're already shelling out, what is the $1,600 for the baseline MacBook Pro, like you can kind of muscle up if you really want to. But do I, use that much oomph? Not particularly, mostly since I'm not doing a lot of video myself. So I'm mostly enjoying the cleanliness and speed and battery life.
Yeah. No, I get that. I think for me, it's like, I'm not an iPhone user. I have an iPhone, but I'm an Android user with a Mac. It's a very weird combo. And I'm not the only one. I know lots of people are. But for me, the reason I went to the Apple was the hardware and the OS. Mm-hmm. And let's be specific. I was a game developer for a long time, so I was in Windows on a desktop machine all day at work. No issues with that. I have no problems with it. Visual Studio was amazing. Most developers I know use it, love it. Of course, if you're developing for iPhone or other Apple devices, you're going to be using Xcode on a Mac, but that wasn't my case. I was doing console gaming and PC gaming, so I was always, and I'm pretty agnostic. I still have PCs. I have a bunch of Linux machines, old ones, kind of like classic computers running Linux, because that's, a better choice than the old OSs. Unless you want to run game emulation or something, then it's nice to have like a Windows XP that's not connected to the internet or something. But the point I'm making is that I switched to Mac because I could finally afford it. I love the hardware. This was like 20 years ago. And more importantly, it was Unix. It was not Linux, but Unix. It was Unix. I had a shell. I had all the development tools that I was used to. Because believe it or not, in video game land, while we're in Windows, we're still running, a Linux environment in a virtual machine, or sometimes even like when Windows gained Linux GCC compatibility, we're running the actual tools directly in there. So even though you're coding in Visual Studio, when you actually compile stuff, you're running essentially the same thing as you would run at command line. And having the ability to go in the nuts and bolts as a developer is really great. So I love that being built into the Mac before it was built into Windows. And also the fact that I don't have to mess about with my Mac's, config. Like on Windows, I was always tempted to be like, oh, let's customize this, let's customize that. And then I would spend time doing that and go down rabbit holes and then play with the registry and then break things. And that's fun if you're just experimenting, if you have a machine set up for that. It's not fun when it's your main machine and you need to get work done, especially as a journalist. Like I just need mission critical stuff. Same with my Android phone, my Pixel, I never put the betas on it. Like, forget that. I have another Pixel I can use for that, But I think for me, that's where the Mac just became my battle axe, because I was like, okay, that thing I customize the wallpaper, maybe put the dock somewhere where I like, and that's it. That's all I get out of it. Maybe change the screensaver or something and call it a day, and I love it. It's just so simple. And then I've got access to, I want to nerd out, I've got a command line I can do whatever the hell I want with, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Being confined into Apple's rigid idea of the user interface is obviously like pretty jarring for everyone at first, but like kind of move beyond that and it will just run forever.
It's, for me, it's like I can context switch between being on Windows versus being on Mac. Like all the keystrokes just automatically switch over, like the ability to zoom the screen by scrolling the mouse wheel with certain keystrokes pushed down, like on the Mac I believe it's control and then the scroll wheel, you can set that up and you can zoom in. It's really great stuff like that. I've replicated that in Windows with a magnifier. Like I've just managed to find a way to make things match, and it's not really a big deal. And so I've stuck with Macs simply because I just love the hardware and that OS. And yeah, the OS has come and gone in terms of its like for features. For a while, they was getting a little too iPad-y, and now I think they've pulled back and they're realizing that they have a big audience out there of pros who just want, what's the best equivalence like that I think Steve Jobs used? A pickup truck, like the thing that can do everything, right? Whereas the iPad is much more like I think of the iPad as a crossover SUV. It does all the family stuff really well. But it doesn't really do heavy lifting that well. I mean, it does potentially, but it doesn't actually have the apps to do the heavy lifting. Unless you're an illustrator or something and you're using an iPad Pro with a pen and whatever. But so to me, these three Macs, just to be clear, because we haven't even mentioned it, there's a Mac Mini M4, there is an iMac M4, and there is a bunch of MacBook Pros with M4. And there's the M4 Pro chip as well on the Mac Mini and the MacBook Pros. So yeah, the big news is the more RAM on everything from the get-go, 16 gig for the same price. Hooray, Apple, for not screwing us around with pricing on that. And of course, they support Apple Intelligence, blah, blah, blah. I don't even want to talk about Apple Intelligence. Like, for me, it's more like the form factor that Mac Mini. Going back to what I said, I had a Mac Mini, I went to the iMac, now I have another iMac, and I felt going to from 27 to 24 was a major bummer for me. But the performance going from an i5 with, by the way, 16 gigs of RAM and an SSD to that M3 with, 8 gigs of RAM and 512 gig SSD was night and day. And I'm suffering through the smaller screen for that. Actually, it's also a worse quality screen. A lot of people don't realize it's slightly worse. If you've ever sat all day like I have in front of a 27-inch iMac and you go to the 24, you're like, it's good in daylight, but as soon as you dim the lights and you start lowering the brightness, it doesn't match what the Air does. It doesn't match what the Pro does. It's not a display that's that great in low light. You see a lot of contrast issues. And for Apple, I think it's a bit of a mess. They really need a 30-inch iMac, in my opinion. And you're going to say, well, what about the Mac Mini? Because I keep coming from the Mac Mini to this. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because ultimately what I really want is a Mac Mini. But the problem is the monitor, right? The studio monitors, well, they're so expensive.
Yeah.
And I can't like I've had Dells and other third-party monitors that have been fantastic. The problem is that you really need a 5K monitor on a modern Mac if you want to not do any weird scaling for the actual proper resolution that Apple wants to support. And there's really three. There's an older LG monitor, which is, by the way, the exact same panel as a 27-inch iMac, but it's pricey. There is a Samsung monitor, which is the most affordable of the three, and it has a webcam that magnetically attaches on it, which is great. And then there is the Apple Studio monitor, and of course the Apple XDR monitor, the crazy one. And those are just two. I can't justify. I can't see myself spending more than like at most $800 to $900 on a monitor. Like even that is like push. To me, it's like $500 to $600 what I want to spend, and that brings me down to a 4K monitor, and then it's not optimal. And so I kind of, and if you add it up, right, like. An iMac with the kind of config I want, it's about $1799. So that's expensive. So basically, I've been wanting to get a Mac Mini for a while, but I can never find a monitor that is reasonable. Like the idea is that if it's going to cost as much as an iMac, I might as well get an iMac, right?
Right.
Because it's like, I'm going to get a slightly better display. Well, at least it used to be, but now it's kind of like, as I said, not quite where we're at. But if I can get a Mac Mini with a 5K display for slightly less than an iMac, then it's worth it for me. So that's what I'm going to explore next because, I live in two places. So right now I'm using a laptop exclusively in Vancouver, and that's fine. But maybe I can take that iMac that I bought in July back to Canada where I'm less often and then upgrade my setup in San Francisco. Like $799 right now for what I want, which is 16 gigs of RAM, which is a default, and 512. That's all I need. And for that, if I can find like on sale for Black Friday, that Samsung monitor, like we're looking at $1299, $13, $14.99. If they sell it for $799, the display, and then I'm like, I'm in business. That's a way better proposition than the M4 iMac, right?
It's kind of what the Mac Mini is for, right? Just to cart around.
Absolutely. And to be frank, honestly, like I would probably buy the keyboard and mouse from Apple because I use them and I love the fingerprint sensor. And you can only get that from Apple. So, but that's, that's me $200 more, whatever. I can justify that. So we'll see. Let's stay tuned, folks. I know, like, I should not have bought that iMac. I was like, can I hobble on a little longer with that 27-inch? And I was like, no, I can't. It's driving me nuts. Everything is slow. And compared to I've had an M1 MacBook Air, then an M2 MacBook Air. This is an M2 MacBook Air. And I'm like, M3 iMac makes perfect sense. And now I'm just like, I can't believe they only had it on sale for 11 months. November 23 to October 24th. Their product cycles are so much shorter than they used to be too, right?
I think we're going to need a little more time between the others, a little more daylight, just because I think they had to rush everything for Apple Intelligence. Like I think they needed to boost.
I think you're right. Yeah. Hopefully I'm definitely looking forward to the new revised MacBook Air. But right now, I think if you desperately need one, the 16 gigs is a pretty awesome thing to have.
Yeah.
So I would consider getting that, folks. All right. So let's see. What else did they announce? The MacBook Pros. Well, I mean, honestly, I actually think that in the past, I was always like, get an Air, and I still think for me, that's true. And I think for a lot of people, I think a lot of people are buying Pros that don't need them, in my opinion. Good for Apple, right? It's like the iPad Pro. I think a lot of people are buying iPad Pros. They absolutely do not need that. In my opinion, nobody needs anything more than a base iPad. That's just me. But unless you're an illustrator, right? And do people really edit video in Final Cut on the iPad?
I don't know. I do think it's left over from an age where they really wanted people to believe the iPad Pro was like a capable enough machine, but it was blending too much with the laptop. Like as you were saying, like the making Mac OS into borrow too much from iPad OS and have iPad OS iPads beefed up enough to compete with. Like you're just not going to get the functionality. Is it powerful enough? Yeah, I mean, like it's got an M chip,
absolutely.
but
That's not in doubt. Like I think you can do it. But do people actually do it? Like, I know people actually use iPads for illustration. Like, that is a thing.
Oh, sure.
But,
Apple Pencil.
Right. And it's amazing now with like that. You can rotate it and it's like, oh my God, Apple's so good. But so for me, it's like, okay, what I'm getting at here is that this new MacBook Pro M4, the base model, is actually very juicy because you get a 120 hertz display, which you don't get on the Air. You get extra ports, which you don't get on the Air. And if you look at the config, right, it is 512 gigs by default, 16 gig by default now. So now, you only get an M4 chip, but bear with me here. If you're looking at a 13-inch Air with those specs, you're looking at about $100 to $200 difference. And at that point, for the 120 hertz display and the extra ports and the thermals, it's totally worth it because you have a fan in there. So if you're doing a bit more heavy lifting, but you can't justify a Pro normally, that might just be the sweet spot. And I don't think Apple's had that sweet spot before. You'd either get like an Air or you'd get like a Pro or Max or whatever. Yeah. Like you'd go both directions. Now you have that little machine in the middle.
Yeah, and I hate to say it, but like maybe, you can get an Air M2 start or pay a little more for an M3. I'm really curious how much they're going to make the M4 baseline going forward, like in the next few years. So I would wonder if like it's worth it to future-proof to just, go up for the M4, depending on what they're going to sort of make backwards compatible.
I mean, they did say that every Mac and from the M1 up can run Apple Intelligence. So.
Yeah, but yeah, I guess that's true. For now. And depending on how useful Apple Intelligence actually is, which, we have our doubts. At the demo event, they showed off the amazing capabilities to be like, hey, Siri, combine PDFs. How do I do it? And it's like, thanks for the text recommendations. Or built-in ChatGPT, right, with their partnership with OpenAI, which is
pro tip. I never use Siri on my Mac, okay?
No.
Sorry, guys.
I use it on my iPhone.
Like, exactly. I have Google Assistant on my watch right here, so why would I bother, Anyway, the other last thing I want to say is that I think the Mac Mini is a win, not just because it's a Mac Mini and it's always been a win, but because now the 2 ports in the front, USB-C, 3 Thunderbolt ports in the back, which are also USB-C. We've got HDMI still. We've got Ethernet still, which I'm really actually surprised they kept, and happy they kept. And then we have a headphone jack in the front. Oh my God, Apple, what is wrong with you? Are you sick? That's incredible. Because even on my iMac, it's on the side. It's a pain in the butt. I actually have an external sound thing. But the power button is on the bottom, kind of like not completely the bottom, but like the edge bottom where the vents are. And honestly, I have zero issues. I don't understand why the internet is losing its mind over this. Okay, hear me out. There was a time when desktop computers should be turned off at night because they were power sucks. Like, even if you have a gaming machine today and it's idling, you're probably drawing 100 or 200 watts of just idling there, of the peripherals being powered and everything. I don't think it's very power efficient, but these integrated machines, like, especially from Apple, especially the M1s, they're laptops in a box. Like, you don't turn off your laptop, you close the lid and it starts back up, right? That's what we've been conditioned to. I mean, maybe it's because I'm a Mac user and I don't get it, but yes, I do sometimes restart my Mac because, well, it acts wonky, or I'm because I have a lot of peripherals plugged in, something breaks, or because there's a software update, and it restarts for me, right? But like, do I actually use the power button? Whoa, like very rarely. And if I do, I can just lift up that little thing and push the button. It's not like a huge deal. Even current Mac Mini, it's in the back. It's a pain in the ass. Like, it's always been a pain in the ass. I don't see what the problem is. But also, I want to add to that there is a setting on every Mac that you can say that if the power comes back on, it turns back on automatically. So like, if you are worried about power outages and you want your Mac always ready to go, just go to power settings and turn that on. And every time your power is given to the thing, it goes chime and off it goes, does its thing. I mean, it's really not a big deal. So
no, I think you're absolutely right.
It's just so funny how people, like, to me, the turtle mouse is, as a user of that mouse, is a bigger deal, like, complain about that if you want to complain about something.
Well, I think that's part of the narrative, right? Is like, Apple is so in on design. So why are these these exceptions are so interesting? So, like, oh, Apple genius. But you're right, and there is, as with the other Mac Mini or the previous one, like there is that like small little like foot almost, and the power button is above that foot, so it's not like you're going to pick it up and accidentally trip it.
Yes.
Nor, like it's going to be easy to reach back, get your finger under there, and hit the power button. That hasn't stopped people from like, we're already seeing 3D printed workarounds of like, these tortured like little hooks, being put in to make a button on the top of it, right? And it's like, okay.
Like,
we also see
those useless boxes where you push the button and it turns itself off again. Like a little robot arm comes out.
Like
yeah. Oh God, hilarious. So that's it. We got a few Macs, and I think this is a step in the right direction. I'm really excited that the Mac Mini is being so much improved. And iMac, please give us a bigger one with a better display is what I'm going to ask Apple at this point.
Something in between Mac Studio and like a baseline.
Yeah, I'm not saying you shouldn't buy an iMac. It's a really good computer. But if you've ever used a 27-inch, it's a downgrade. Like, I mean, in terms of the display. And in that sense, I'm actually thinking of spending the money on the parts to turn my 27-inch into a display. That's another option. Might actually be cheaper than buying an external display right now. Got it all out. Because that display has years of life. It's an LED backlight. It's not like just going to cronk out, tomorrow or something. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, I'm not 100% satisfied with my iMac. So we'll see. All right. So we got a whole bunch of phones to talk about. The phone apocalypse is upon us in October or November now. I think it feels like this year was Techtober all year. Wouldn't you say, David?
Yeah, I mean, there's always that little blip in like March or April before things get a little heavier in May, and then August is when the onrush starts. But MWC onward, it's just phone after phone.
Yeah. So China is getting all their phones right now. Some of them are global models, so some of them are coming to Europe. Of course, in the US, we're not getting anything. I believe it's possible that the OnePlus 13 was just announced in China, so we might get that sometime. I don't see them coming out with it until after the holidays, though. It doesn't make sense. Unless they want to hit Black Friday.
Maybe, but they'd have to rush for it.
That would be a rush, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, but there's a bunch of phones we want to talk about. Basically, I'll go quickly run through the list. The Xiaomi 15 series, there's a Pro and a bunch of different 15 regular models, which is interesting. Find X series from Oppo, Find X8, OnePlus 13. We've got the Realme GT7 Pro, which I have in my hands for those of you watching on Patreons. This is my first Snapdragon 8 Elite phone. Very sexy orange color. I have some thoughts about that, and we'll talk about that. But also, there's some controversies because this is the first 8 Elite that we got our hands on, and everybody's running benchmarks, and everybody's going like, "What is going on here?" So we'll talk about that a little bit, and then also the box for this. I don't have it here, but the box for this says Snapdragon 8 Gen 4, which is hilarious.
So I mean, that's what we all expected it to be called, so sure.
I feel like Qualcomm must have changed their marketing very last minute on this one.
Probably.
Yeah.
And to align with Auto, maybe, with, I mean,
yeah,
it is,
maybe, or maybe with
told,
X,
Elite.
with the laptops is what I'm thinking. Because the Auto, who cares what they call the Auto chips? I mean, like, it turns out the Auto chips are really like very nebulous into how many chips you need and how they're defined and all that. So like, you were there at that briefing. All right. And then the other thing is nothing gave us a glow in the dark phones. So, let's talk about that. And then, so let's start with the Xiaomi, because Xiaomi 15 Pro is interesting because of course it's 8 Elite and it was announced to be the first official like 8 Elite phone available, right?
On stage,
on stage.
On the keynote.
But the fact remains that in reality, in the real world, in the real universe, I have a Realme GT7 Pro in my hand. So how do we deal with that? But yeah, it's interesting. The 15 Pro actually is interesting to me because it has kind of an interesting camera setup. I mean, this is going to be obviously always the case with Xiaomi. Their flagship always has good cameras. They have that Leica partnership, but it's using an OmniVision Light Fusion 900 sensor. That's the same sensor they used on the 14 last year. So obviously it worked really well on the 14. So it's interesting to see that they kept that and that they kept a 5x periscope telephoto. 50 megapixel, of course, and a 50 megapixel ultra wide. So, unlike others who are kind of trying to fill the gap between the 2x in sensor crop and the 5x zoom by doing a 3x or somewhere in their telephoto, Xiaomi's sticking with kind of like what Apple's doing on this one. But 6100 milliamp hour battery.
Huge.
Like, have you noticed that every phone we're going to talk about has massive batteries?
I've noticed that this is really, this is the first time we're hearing above, meaningfully above 5,000 milliamps, and US released phones have not broken the 5,000 milliamp barrier. So this phone is
right
huge.
Here, this Realme, 6,500 milliamp hour. 120 watt charging. They're not messing about.
No.
It's kind of fascinating. So basically we're looking at a bunch of cool colors, of course. The pricing is Chinese pricing, so $742 is where it starts at for 12,256. We'll never see these in global markets the phones are coming, but pricing will be probably a little more, but still those are pretty competitive. They sound like flagship pricings to me.
Yeah.
So this is great. I think this is a good looking phone and I look forward to having it in my hands.
Yeah, I think it's a shame that the US is not getting this, and especially if Europe doesn't get it either. Curious about some of the stuff they're swapping out. They're sticking with Snapdragon, cool, but they're also Xiaomi itself switching to this Dragon Crystal glass, so moving away from the Corning standard around the world. I found a very fun clip from last year where someone was using their Xiaomi 14 to hammer in nails with the screen. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Oh,
China has their own glass, kind of expertise now. And that's fair. But these are I'm pretty sure these are coming globally. At least the 15 is. I'm not sure about the 15 Pro.
Yeah.
And we'll see that soon. But it's interesting to see. They didn't give us too much detail at the summit, so it's interesting to see. Finally, we got the deets here, and I dig it. I want an Ultra, obviously. I had the 14 Ultra, and oh my God, that. Honestly, I wish I had taken that to Antarctica. No offense to Oppo, the Find X8 Ultra that I did on that story I wrote for Forbes was amazing, but I really wanted the 14 Ultra. We knew it was coming, but it wasn't available yet. So let's see, there's also a 15, and the 15 is interesting because it comes in these special editions and stuff. And just like the iMac, some really cool colors. I did really like these new iMac colors, by the way.
Yeah. Pastels and this wavy metallic thing. I think that's my favorite.
Yeah, me too.
Diamond edition.
Yeah, the diamond edition. Also the leather ones, they have leather finish on them.
Yeah. I do miss some of the nicer editions. There was a stretch there 5-6 years ago, pre-pandemic, where companies were having their Porsche editions, right? Their Ferrari editions of phones, and they're beautiful leather backing, right? That was Huawei did that. I think OnePlus might have as well with some of its concept phones. But
so what's interesting about this one, and what I really like every year about the base model numbered series from Xiaomi, is that it's a small display, something like 6.3 inches, and it's staying small again this year, 6.36 here. And but the cameras are just as good. And then we're getting a 5,400 milliamp hour battery, which is what? And so the reason for that is because they're using these silicon carbon batteries. All of these phones we're going to talk about now, it's China did it a little bit with Honor and Huawei were the first last year, and then it's been an onslaught for this year. And the other thing we're noticing is a lot of phones are IP69, which is basically IP68 plus 80 degrees Celsius water jets. You need that. We're not sure. Do you hot pressure wash your phone? That's the question to ask.
Or drop them in enough jacuzzis. But even that is
even jacuzzi is not hot enough. And it's not, if you put it in front of the jet of a jacuzzi, maybe, I don't know. It's just very, very strange. And I'm very amused. But 8 Elite, great battery. cameras are triple 50 megapixel. It's got that light fusion from OmniVision as the main sensor again. And yeah, it has a slightly smaller telephoto. I think it's only a 3x.
Yeah.
And that's basically it. But if you want a small phone that doesn't suck, and you know, of course, the Pixel 9 Pro or 9 are good ones. There's always the S series from Samsung, but I kind of don't think they're that great, to be honest. That's my
lower
opinion.
charging, you know.
When you look at those
not as
specs,
great. Yeah.
I'd rather take this to be any time of the day. Plus, you know, having had all these phones in my hands in North America, they work fine. Like, you can just, unless you're on Verizon, you can use these phones. So, especially nowadays, like, they have all the bands and everything works. Wi-Fi 7, la la la. So yeah, I dig a lot, especially the alligator leather, that orange leather they have. Oh my God. And those colors down there, the custom edition.
A lot of colors.
Oh my God. Xiaomi, why'd you come to North America? You're so ready for it.
Yeah, I think they'd have a stronger presence and stronger play than Huawei did years ago. So
you know, they could bring the Poco brand here.
Yeah,
like if Xiaomi does sound a bit too Chinese maybe for the US, so just bring Poco.
Too much bad press from the last few years for political reasons. All this sort of stuff.
I know they don't want to risk it. I get it. All right, so moving on to the Find X8 series. The reason I'm amped about those is kind of twofold. First of all, I'm getting one next week. I don't know which one. Hopefully the 8 Pro. Dimensity 9400. So it'll be interesting to put side by side with this Realme in terms of performance. But they're very similar, except that the bigger one, the more expensive one, the Pro, has an extra telephoto. So it's kind of like the Find X7 Ultra that I took to Antarctica last year, which had 4 lenses, 450 megapixel cameras in the back, an ultra wide, a main sensor, which didn't have variable aperture, which the Xiaomi had on the Ultra, but it didn't on the Oppo. But it also had 2 telephotos, a 3x and a 6x, and both were periscope lenses. And you've noticed if you look down I'll put a link in the show notes to a GSM Arena summary of the specs here. If you look down and the illustration there, this time the 3x telephoto is a dual prism setup. So it's very similar to that setup that Apple is using on the 16 Pro.
Tetraprism, yeah.
The Tetraprism, yeah. But so you won't have a square opening for that 3x telephoto. You'll have a round one. In fact, this is a BBK group thing, because we're going to talk about the OnePlus 13 in a second. If you look at the OnePlus 13 photos and you look at this camera module, that one there, if you're watching on Patreon, the one closest to my finger I'm tapping is
bottom left
that
corner, yeah.
prismatic. So it has the 3x telephoto on the Realme as well. And it's the same f-stop, the same sensor. So, and we're seeing the same thing on OnePlus as well. So it's really interesting to me that they're going in that route and like spreading that across all of their phones. And so, yeah, of course, the base model has that 3x prismatic, whatever lens as well, but not the bigger periscope. And, you know, Dimensity 9400, big batteries, 5630 milliamp hour, you know, wireless, all these phones have wireless charging, by the way, except for the Realme. I'll get to that in a minute. So all the phones we're talking about right now.
At pretty substantial rates too. We're talking 40,
they're all
50
like
watt.
Exactly. It's like China. It's like, oh yeah, Qi, haha, Qi 2, haha. Let us give it's Qi 1 backwards compatible always, by the way.
Yeah.
So yeah, honestly, and then pricing, you know, we're looking at $590 for the base model then, and $740. These are Chinese prices. These are not available globally yet, and they've made no mention of them becoming global. So I don't know. We'll see. Will it happen or not?
Some fun colors too.
Yeah. They look very much the same industrial design as we saw on last year's Find series, and especially the OnePlus Open, which, by the way, was called the Find N3 in the rest of the world. So, yeah, I dig it a lot. I hope that Dimensity holds up. I mean, Clearly the thermals are definitely going to be a challenge for 8 Elite phones. And I don't knew that. Like, I think people are just upset, like, because maybe Qualcomm is setting poor expectations here. Because look, the reality is last year's Gen 3 in my testing, and every phone review that I write for Hot Hardware, I have to do benchmarks. I don't care about benchmarks, but I have to run them, and I have to be, we're doing it very scientifically. We have a spreadsheet we keep with all the numbers from all the phones. And I'm telling you this, sustained performance has taken a dump since the Gen 3. Like, it is, the Gen 2 was okay. Some phones did better than others, but across the board, unless you're looking at gaming phones, Gen 3 was, after the first 2 or 3 minutes, you drop to 50%, 60 to 50% performance. Oof. Every single phone. S24 series, all of them. Like, it doesn't matter. So, like, we're freaking out here about this Realme. We'll get to that in a second. But I'm like, I expect it to be even more of an issue with the 8 Elite and the Dimensity 9400, because those prime cores, like, once you fire up those suckers, you can't expect things to last in terms of sustained performance unless you actively cool it, which is what Red Magic's going to do with the Red Magic 10 series. And it'll be interesting to see what Asus does with the ROG Phone 9 that I did a hands-on with at the summit last week, because they don't have an active fan. They have a tack-on fan, which you'll probably want to use. And that's okay. Like, if you're gaming, why don't you want a built-in fan? Like, I get it, But like, those of us who are complaining right now that we're seeing this sustained performance issues, look, the big batteries speak for themselves. They're putting bigger batteries in there because silicon carbon, but also because, like, these processors are like essentially laptop like level processors, right? Like, what do you want? So don't complain. What will happen is you'll get incredible performance when you need it. And yes, your battery will suck and your heat will go up a bit, but then you're not going to sustain that unless you're gaming. If you're gaming, you're going to want to just cool it down somehow or use a gaming phone, which is the way it should be. And I think this is the trend. And I think that the industry is kind of accepting this. Like, I think Qualcomm and MediaTek are going like, this is the only way we're going to be able to do this right. And so I think the benchmark people need to adjust their benchmarks to reflect that. Like, because in reality, I had zero issues with any of the Gen 3 phones. None of them overheated. They were great. So, for maybe 3D Mark needs to reevaluate how they do things.
And how many of your processes, aside from, I don't know, playing Genshin at max settings, even Genshin is sort of optimized, right? Like, how many games are really going to push it to the point of a 3D Mark experience? Like, Apple's been trying to port over for its gaming some big names, right? Your Resident Evils and all that sort of stuff to play on it natively. They had a Control playing on some of those MacBook Pros. I would imagine they would try to get it, like on phones. Are you really playing like console level games on your phone? That's where I would see you needing to have a sustained, half-hour gaming session of it running all those cores at max. And I just don't think there's.
So, that actually brings us to OnePlus 13 and Realme. I'm excited about these Oppos. I'm looking forward to getting one. Hopefully they send me the Pro. Please send me the Pro. I want those telephotos. OnePlus 13. So OnePlus 13, now we know what it's going to be. And it's basically a OnePlus 12, cranked up with an 8 Elite and better thermals. And and now instead of curved edges, it is a quad, slightly curved edge all the way around, which, by the way, is also on this Realme. The difference is that this Realme has essentially a 1220p display, one of those in between 1080p and 4K.
Quad HD.
And as you can see, the bezels are even everywhere. And it also has a quad edge. You can see how it's kind of round on all four sides. For those of you watching on Patreon. And what that means is this, get this, has a 6500 nits peak brightness.
Ooh.
Yeah, but the OnePlus is a quad HD display. It's slightly bigger than this. This is like 6.7 and I think it's 6.8 or something. And it's quad HD, but it's does only 4500 nits. So that's the difference between these two phones. Also, the alert slider and wireless charging on the OnePlus, which we don't get on the Realme, which we did on last year's Realme flagship, but for some reason they decided to go for a 6,500 milliamp hour battery, 120 watt charging instead of having wireless charging. The the OnePlus still keeps wireless charging and charges at slightly slower speed. And I don't think it has a 6,500 milliamp hour battery, but I could be wrong. Let's see. Yeah, 6,000. Not bad. And 100 watt wired and 50 watt wireless. Like, I dig this design though. That little bar next to the Hasselblad logo.
It's nice. It's a nice touch given that the camera blocks are all expanding to get those bigger and bigger lenses. So, and just like the H logo is nice. We see too many camera logos kind of inflated next to the glass. So subtle,
I dig. And also, very nice camera system. Lydia 808 main sense with OIS. That 3x periscope, Lydia 600 with it's that dual prism periscope that we were just talking about, and a nice ultra wide as well. The other thing that the Realme cuts corner on is the ultra wide, like it did last year. So the only difference last year between the OnePlus 12 and the Realme GT7 Pro was 8 megapixel, like basic ultra wide, and this also has that 8 megapixel basic ultra wide. So there are a few differences there, but honestly, it's OnePlus 13 is going to be a great phone. I feel like I have a very, very good feeling about it. The 12 was so good last year. Man, that phone, just yum. So yeah, that's kind of what the OnePlus 13 and IP69, of course, hot tub time. Do we have pricing here for China? Let's see.
Yeah, it looks like 632 converted for the base model, and 842 with the it goes up to 24 gigs of RAM.
Of course, and 1 terabyte of storage. Yeah. Well, the base model has only 12 and 256. Oh noes. Not bad. We'll see. I think you can typically add $100 US to that to give a feel for what we're going to get in the US. I think we're going to see this phone at $759, $799. What is the OnePlus 12 when it launched? Can't remember.
800 for the baseline to 900.
Here's my guess. We're going to see the same pricing, and if OnePlus is cocky, just $25 more or something.
Bump it up above the 900 level.
Yeah, that would not be good. Wait, you said 900 is the base price or 800 is the base price?
No, 800 is base price, 900 is.
So I see them maybe going to like 829, but honestly, it would look so good on paper with 799, right?
Yep.
This is a good phone for 799, guys. When you see what iPhone 16 delivers, like I think that I'm pretty happy with this.
Yeah, extra lens, bigger battery.
Right.
IP69, like just nice.
So GT7 Pro, as I said, not quite a match for the OnePlus 13, just like the GT5 Pro last year wasn't quite a match for the OnePlus 12. But the biggest deletion this year is the lack of wireless charging. But you get that massive battery, and also that camera pod is not very sexy in my opinion. I like the round one. Last year, the Realme had essentially the same camera pod as the OnePlus, so it looked really nice. But it's thin and pretty sexy. And by the way, all these phones have ultrasonic fingerprint sensors this year, all of them. So I think the entire industry is shifting to large 6,000-ish milliamp hour batteries, 69 for the water resistance IP rating, and ultrasonic fingerprint sensors. Interesting. Right.
I do think phones are getting largely more durable, way more durable.
I agree.
The last few years of Gorilla Glass, Victus and further of just, we don't talk about dropping phones and cracking screens anymore. We don't talk about damage. We don't talk about, bricking them, dropping them in water. So it's just nice to see like all of that in bigger, more robust packages.
Yeah.
Better cameras, bigger batteries. Like it doesn't look like we're getting more year on year out, but like we kind of are.
And the other thing to keep in mind is that you look at phones like the CMF Phone 1, right? $200. You get so much value. Like I think you cannot buy a bad phone these days. I mean, maybe there are a few that are meh.
At the very bottom. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that even like since you can buy in the US a CMF Phone 1 for $200 and it works on pretty much on all the carriers except Verizon, I'd say you're saved. I'd say, the only thing that's maybe I'm hoping they do a CMF phone 1 Plus, like they did the Nothing Phone 2A Plus, where they add NFC. That's all they need. That's all they need to add to make that phone usable for North America. Because that's the only thing that I feel I'm missing on it. The camera is actually really good, even though it doesn't have OIS. I used it a lot in Hawaii. But speaking of, we also have this Nothing Phone 2A Plus fluorescent color, or glow in the dark. So that's cool. I mean, that's just a side note. It's called the Phone 2A Plus Community Edition. It's a mouthful, but all the cool little antenna stuff, that's not antenna, but like circuit board tracing type things inside the phone glow in the dark.
Yeah, wouldn't call it cyberpunk, but Nothing really does have an eye for making something that's different, that people have a little fun with. I mean, how many of us use cases that are going to cover it up? So like, unfortunate, but it's at a price where you're not too bummed about, like, if you're going to scratch or crack the back screen. Love lights, love glow in the dark. Like, why not? It's this is a very limited edition. We should probably point out.
Yes.
I guess only 1,000 units, but Nothing seems like they're very in touch with their community. So.
I love it. I love what they're doing, and it's not just Nothing. It's their lower brand CMF as well. Everything I've touched of theirs has been great. And like, the first gen products, like the initial earbuds, had some software issues. The initial phone wasn't, the greatest, but like it was still a good phone. And now pretty much everything they make is really, really good. I can only recommend it, but I still think that phones that stand out for me in their series are definitely the Phone 2, the more the premium one. Although the 2A is great, but I think that the 2A is kind of overshadowed a little bit by CMF Phone 1 because it's so good for the money. Like, to me, those are the ones. And then the earbuds. The CMF buds, the watch, okay. But the normal buds, the current ear, which is essentially the 3rd gen ear, and then the ear A in particular, so good. Like, we're talking Galaxy, buds good. We're talking Apple AirPods good. We're talking OnePlus top of the line earbuds good. That's how good. And that's impressive. That's impressive. You know what we didn't talk about that we should have talked about, which is kind of fun, is this the benchmarks for this guy. So we did kind of mention it, but Hadley Simons over at Android Authority was the first to run benchmarks on this and found that Realme is cheating. They're detecting what benchmarks you're running. They're cranking up everything to 11. The phone's overheating and can't finish the benchmarks, at least for sustained performance. Not surprising, but what was Realme thinking? Like, this is like, we went through this a few years back and they did it and OnePlus did it. And we thought we were over that, but no, apparently not. So stay tuned for real benchmarks is what I'm saying. At some point, they're going to turn off these weird, things they're doing. And in fact, Hadi was able to spoof the APKs. They have a set of in-house Android Authority versions of these benchmarks that have been modified so they don't appear to be the same binaries. And they're using those and they're seeing much more reasonable results. I don't know why they would shoot themselves in the foot like that. And also take down Qualcomm in the process. Yeah. And because they were really the first out of the gate. Like, even though Xiaomi said they reached out to the media like last week and said, we're shipping you a phone for next week. It's crazy, right? Like, why would they do that? It's silly.
Oh yeah, especially when you look at the graphs Hadley got for his benchmarks, and it's such an embarrassing real result, looking at like how much they are boosting, accelerating. And what did he say? Got up to like 45 degrees Celsius in hand. Like, jeez. That's dangerous, man. That'll burn a hole in your pocket or burn skin.
Think of what it does to your battery.
Yeah.
Oof. Yeah. All right. One last phone. Well, technically there's another one after that, but it's not really a phone.
Quote unquote phone, yeah.
Automagic 7 series unveiled, which, is exactly what we'd expect from Honor. So a Snapdragon 8 Elite, of course. And then we have some crazy camera action, 200 megapixel telephoto at 2.7x, or 2.5x. Very similar to the 180 megapixel that they did last year, but bigger sensor and more reach. So you can do 100 digital zoom, they claim. It's an interesting setup because you got this 50 megapixel main sensor with variable aperture, like the Xiaomi 14 Ultra does. And, good f-stop, of course, f over 1.4 with variable aperture up to f over 2.0. This is going to be a camera beast. Big screen. It's got one of those, what's it called? Face ID kind of sensors like the iPhone does in the screen. So it's got a pill-shaped cutout in the display. The non-Pro has 6.78 inch, so slightly smaller instead of 6.8. And both of them are like crazy 5,000 nit max. Everybody's gone to LTPO, by the way. Also, Realme's gone to LTPO this year. So nobody's holding back, 5,800 milliamp hour battery. Like, we're seeing some crazy numbers here. Of course, Honor's one of the first to use silicon carbon batteries. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I think, if Honor could improve its software and make review units more available, because I've had a hard time getting them from them.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
It's nice seeing, someone keep leading the charge for, just like massive megapixel on a camera, especially with the telephoto, so that, years of Samsung's, magic zoom, what do they call it? Where, you're getting 100, right? But like anything above 30 times combination of opticals, it's bad. So if you can literally just and yes, it makes the image size massive, but if you can literally just do that crop zoom in with a 180, 200, now 200 megapixel telephoto image, like you can actually get some kind of granularity and sharpness on these zoomed in photos. So you don't necessarily need to boost the optical, but if you can get the sharpness of it, cool. And leading the charge on that, no one else is like boosting their megapixels. Generally, like it feels like it's 50 megapixels is kind of the nice new cap for a lot of them. So show us what you can do so that maybe other phone makers, other OEMs can, see what's possible, I guess. Because you see more and more of these numbers come out of Chinese phones and you're like, well, why am I still getting the same from Samsung, from Google, even from Apple, obviously. Do people need all that zoom? Maybe not, but they also haven't had the capability to get in that far and have photos with any kind of legibility past like a typical, 5 to 10 times zoom. So that's top of mind for me. But everything else, it's a rising tide. It's bigger battery. It's breaking that 6,000 milliamp mark. Always curious, or almost breaking that 6,000 milliamp mark. But I'm always curious, like how much the other upgrades balance that out. Is this going to push us over 1 day of battery life average, like depending on what you're doing, of course. We'll see, I guess, because there are so many other things coming out. I don't think people are going to, up and use AI tomorrow on all these devices. Will that add to the workload? But also, we get to the charge and we get to this 100-watt wired and 80-watt wireless.
Yeah. And the prices, again, like we're looking at, $630 for the base model 7, $800 for the Pro, which is, when you look at those specs, is insane.
Yeah.
Remember, these are beautiful glass and metal. There's no plastic here. This is like, everything is super high end and refined on these phones. They don't compromise in any way. As I said, the only thing that bugs me about Honor, if anything, is the software usually, but the hardware is, it's basically they've replaced Huawei leading the pack in many ways. And you see that with these devices at these specs, and it's like, wow, So yeah. I think, it's interesting that in the past, the Magic series, like the mainline flagships from Honor, have been coming later. Like, like Magic 6, I think, came out even after CES, like in time for MWC. So this is the first time that Honor is really like, we're here. 8 Elite, we're here, right? So, interesting, I think.
Yeah.
The last thing we have on our plate is the Books Palma. I've mentioned this before. It kind of like, David Pierce kind of made this a popular device in a way, because this is what it is. It's an ebook reader that's the size and shape of a phone with an e-ink display, and it doesn't have cellular connectivity. So it's kind of like an iPod Touch, or
Great comparison.
or like the Beam Pro from X-Rail, the thing that drives their AR glasses. It also looks like a phone and that has a camera but doesn't have 5G or cellular. And so they've upgraded it. Last year's was very popular, but some people, were like, it could be better. And so it runs Android. This is not kind of tied to a single book ecosystem, which is what I think makes it so special. And of course, the e-ink. It has a camera, which is mostly for scanning documents. It's nothing fancy, 60 megapixel. But the big thing is, they've upgraded the processor. It's $280, So there you go. That's where we're at with this. And what's your take on this device?
Yeah, I've got a Nook that I've got as a reference or as a review unit like 5 or 6 years ago, and I just haven't needed to have anything else. I kind of like that it's wider. That's where I read all my Kindle books. I've tried to do the Kindle app on the phone, but of course, being connected to all my apps, it's easy to get a notification, get distracted, and I think the e-ink display on this e-ink is so much better for reading, just across the board. I'm curious how people will want to read in this format. I think there's, just like the small size of the screen. People have been trained to read so much on their phones already. Like it's a shoe-in, and $280 is, a little bit pricey for e-readers. But I think there's a lot here that it's reaching the point of,
you could make this your calm device.
Yeah.
You were saying, you could carry your main phone with you, put your main phone on like completely do not disturb, have this set up to not have notifications except for like maybe critical things. And then you could just like be, okay, I want to listen to music and read a book for a little while on the train, on my commuter, whatever. And you still want something portable because you don't want to have it in a bag. You just want it in your pocket. So you have 2 pockets. You put in the other pocket. I can see a point, and I think that, I don't think David Pierce's writing about it and talking about it on his podcast and stuff is what made it popular. I think that it just raised awareness of a category or device that people didn't expect or didn't even know existed, that clearly fills a niche, right?
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about, even the sort of simple phone like idea, right? It's like, it's challenging that, we just spent, a half an hour talking about all of these top of the line phones. What else can you do with that format? It is fortunate that like the entire phones industry has, standardized and formalized this, but also has the production capability to mean that like, I can, you can just reconfigure a few of these production lines for this slightly different device. And it's cheap enough, has a different take on what you're doing, and you're familiar enough with like this form factor. Yeah, just make it a book, just make it an e-reader. Is 280 like too pricey? We'll see. Like, does it need fingerprint recognition, right? Does it need enough bells and whistles, or should they shave some of that off? Would they do better at $200, maybe just under? I think that we'll find out, right?
We'll see. Yeah, I mean, I'm for it. I'm saying like variety is the spice of life, and this is cool. Like it's just like, maybe you have that extra budget for this. Like I personally don't need it. Like I just recently played with the TCL Next Paper phone. The new one that they released. Their higher end of they're all mid-range phones or budget phones, the better one of all that. And honestly, that display to me seems like the best compromise, like having that matte finish on the screen worked really well for me, especially when you put it in e-reader mode, which is like black and white. I dig it. I could do that instead as a Books Palma, and that has cellular, right? So, of course, it's not a great phone, and, it's a budget phone. So, but if you have to have one device and reading is a priority, maybe look for the same amount of money, roughly, look at the TCL instead, like if you're budget constrained, or buy a Pixel 8a and set the screen to monochrome, which I believe is a setting.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a good tip.
Like, I'm just saying, like, minimum standards. To me, that's kind of like where we're at. OnePlus 12R, Pixel 8a, 7a, even if you want to discount. Like, those phones are killer.
Mm-hmm. They were great when they came out, and they will.
You're not making compromises, right? It'll be interesting to see if OnePlus does a 13R this year. We haven't heard anything about that.
No, I feel like they've been erratic. Not releasing them every year, so we'll see.
Yeah,
it's still not like I assume they're going to release in the US. Still not clear, as you were saying, if they're going to come out in the US. So, like, I think the 13R was
okay. I'm going to make a prediction, and then we can wrap up. 8 Plus chipset will be on the OnePlus 13R.
Oh, are they really going to go for a more powerful chipset? Or are they going to wait
for the Plus is, you remember on the X series, it's the entry level. God, so entry level 8 series mobile chip on a OnePlus 13R. I don't know. I'm just making it up. I could be very wrong.
Still have AI stuff.
Yeah. I mean, why not? All right. David, tell the world where they can find you on the internet, your social media handles. Of course, you write for CNET, so let us know where we can read your stuff, etc. If you have a YouTube channel as well, whatever.
Sure. Yeah, you can definitely find me. Just search my name, David Lumb, Lumb, on CNET. I'm on Twitter still, God forbid, at Out on a Lum. Cute pun. And same on Blue Sky. It should be the same on Blue Sky as well. Once Elon Musk finally drives it into the ground. So,
oh boy,
yeah.
Do you do Insta at all?
Not professionally. I got my own account, but it's mostly for friends and family and specific tech folks so that I can show my dumb little adventures when we go on there.
What about Threads? Have you adopted that as well?
I need to come back to it. It's mostly Twitter and Blue Sky for me right now. Maybe Meta will drag me back in, but for now it's just text on CNET and socials on the other places.
Awesome. And folks, you know where to find me on the internet. I'm at Tankgirl. That's TNKGRL. Like the comic book character, drop all the vowels and you get my handle. I'm still on Twitter, for better or for worse, because I still have a following there and conversations that don't actually suck. So, I feel a little weird about it, to be frank, though. And then Threads, very active there. That's my preferred place right now. Blue Sky, Mastodon as well. Facebook, Instagram, love Instagram. So yeah, check it out. There's a YouTube channel as well, youtube.com/mobile tech podcast with some unboxing videos and hands-on videos. So if you want some free video content, check that out. The podcast itself lives at mobiletechpodcast.com. We're on all the major platforms, so subscribe and tell your friends. Same with YouTube. You know how it works. Like, subscribe, tell your friends, click the bell. Comment on the YouTube channel about the podcast as well. It's fine. Also, if your podcast app lets you review the show or whatever, rate it, please consider doing that. It might help. There's a Patreon. I mentioned it a few times. You can see this beautiful phone that I'm just holding right now, the Realme GT7 Pro. Patreon.com/Tankgirl. That's patreon.com/TNKGRL. If you want to help me out, consider joining. It's $5 a month to get the videos, and you get a video every week for every podcast, and you get it a day in advance. And I leave bloopers in there and I leave extra content when we go over time. So you get a little more content sometimes. You get to see phones and see our faces. And, $5 a month for every show and you get it in advance. So think about that if you can help. And if you don't want to do Patreon, a link in the show notes, you can click on it and it takes you to a PayPal button, make a donation for PayPal. Buy me a coffee or something. It'd be great. Patreon.com/TNKGRL. And I want to thank our sponsor, Mint Mobile. So as you know, I'm constantly reviewing multiple phones. And while that's fun, it also means I'm constantly spending a lot of money for wireless service on multiple SIMs. That's where Mint Mobile comes in. And that's who I'm partnering with for today's podcast. If you also want to save money on your wireless service, switch to Mint Mobile. As tech-savvy early adopters, you've probably heard of Mint Mobile before, but let me quickly tell you how awesome their service is. Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for as low as $15 a month, and you don't have to sacrifice any coverage, speed, or data. They're built on the nation's largest 5G network. They keep costs low because they sell direct to you online. They cut out the retail stores and salespeople. Why should you pay more than you have to for access to the same network? In my experience testing phones, Mint Mobile delivers the same data speeds and call quality as the big three for a fraction of the cost. Switching to Mint is super easy. Thanks to their eSIMs, you can sign up and activate immediately right on your phone from the comfort of your home. No more standing around and waiting in line at a big wireless store. You can keep your current device and phone number and easily switch services. And if your phone isn't eSIM compatible, Mint will ship you a new SIM free of charge. All Mint Mobile plans include unlimited nationwide talk and text, lightning fast 5G, and free mobile hotspot. Mint will show you how much data you use each month and recommend plans that save you money. Mint also offers a modern family plan that lets you set up a super affordable family plan with as little as 2 lines. Use my link mintmobile.com/mobiletech to get premium wireless starting for $15 a month. That's mintmobile.com/mobiletech. Stop paying more than you need on your wireless bill and start saving big with Mint Mobile. And David, thanks for being on the show again. Appreciate you coming. Thanks.
Thanks so much for having me, Miriam. This was great to chat about all the deluge, the Apple stuff, and then everything with the Snapdragon 8 Elite chips that we got to see last week. So great to be here.
Yeah, I mean, and the fact that you went to the Apple event in LA is like icing on the cake. So thanks for filling us in on that stuff. And folks, stay tuned. We'll have another show next week. Until then, cheers, everybody.